This is the T54E2, otherwise known as the Shark, and in today's video I will be breaking down its statistics, and as well I will also be showing you how to play the tank. Now the Shark, other than looking absolutely cool, is a very strong tier 8 heavy tank. In fact, it is so strong that it is arguably one of the most overpowered tier 8s in the entire game, which really says a lot as to how strong this tank is, as there are just so many overpowered tier 8s. But anyway, getting into the statistics of the Shark now, let's take a look at the armor because that is arguably one of the strongest things about this particular tank. Now, if we take a look at the armor here, you can see that the turret and the upper plate are extremely red, and for the most part, you will basically be impenetrable when it comes to these particular areas. Now, technically speaking, you do have that hatch on the top of your turret. However, I have found that the majority of the time, the enemy will miss this because it's just small enough that it's not terribly easy to hit at medium to long range. Closer shots will sometimes go in, but even then, it is not a guarantee. Now, of course, you also have that lower plate, which is arguably fairly weak. However, there is something that's still just a little bit nice about this particular lower plate, and that is if you look at the top of the tank, you can see that the lower plate is not actually flat. In fact, it is slightly rounded, which means that it can at times be a little bit troll, particularly if you come out at, say, a 45-degree angle or so. It will still likely be a penetration if the enemy shoots you there. However, it is just slightly troll enough that you can indeed get bounces off the lower plate, which is another nice thing about the armor of this tank. Now, when it comes to side scraping, it's not fantastic. It's not like a mouse or anything. However, it is technically better than a lot of the American heavies. So in a pinch, this can definitely side scrape. But I would argue that it's not really your go-to, especially against things like an ISU, which has incredible penetration. And then, of course, you've got the back of your tank, which can be HE'd by a variety of different tier 8s, so there's not a whole lot to speak there. Now, overall, in general, just looking at the armor, it is very clear that this is definitely meant to be a hull-down heavy, particularly with that 10 degrees of gun depression that you have. So really, in a best case scenario, you want to get into a position, hold the position, don't move, and just only show your turret, and even then, only when you're actually firing, making it incredibly difficult for the enemy to even penetrate you. Now, of course, there's more to a tank than just the armor, so let's take a look now at some of the other statistics of the tank, starting with the mobility, because I feel this really ties in very well with the playstyle that this tank is, where you want to find a spot and then kind of hold that position, because with your top speed forward of 40 kilometers per hour, you can easily get into position with relative speed without being super slow, and as well as a bonus, you do have 20 kilometers per hour of reverse speed, which is also very good for trying to back up out of some certain sticky situations that you may find yourself in. Now, when it comes to the hit points of this tank, you've actually got a fairly decent base hit point pool of 1,850, which can come in really handy when you do get penetrated because even though you do have so much armor, it does, of course, happen. So not only are you very strong and able to tank a lot of shells, but when you do get penetrated, you actually have enough hit points that you can still stay in the battle for quite a while. Now, the view range, of course, being a heavy tank, is not the most fantastic, sitting at 240 meters of view range, which is still enough to get some moderately distant enemies spotted up, but it is definitely not a great tank for trying to actively go and spot with. Now, when it comes to the firepower of this tank for the AP rounds, you've got a very decent 2,000 damage per minute, which can really help with getting some nice damage games out, and as well assisting your team with clearing out some of the enemy heavy tanks. Now, your penetration isn't the most fantastic, sitting at 220 millimeters. However, I have found that this overall is enough penetration to hit most large weak spots on a tank, and your damage is sitting at about 310 for the AP rounds, and you've got a very nice shell velocity of 1067. Now the APCR rounds are very similar in terms of characteristics, obviously lower damage per minute sitting at 1677. However, your premium penetration isn't that much better than your normal rounds, sitting at just 260 millimeters of penetration. Now your damage, funny enough, is also 260, which is kind of mediocre in some cases. However, it is still definitely doable and is not necessarily a bad amount of alpha for your APCR rounds. Now, your shell velocity is of course even better than your AP rounds, sitting at 1334 shell velocity for the APCR rounds. Now, I find that the HE on this tank is kind of hit or miss because on the one hand, your damage per minute with HE is 2,839, which sounds fantastic. However, of course, in most situations, you're not just shooting HE, and the penetration is kind of lacking when it comes to the HE, sitting at 53 millimeters. Now, this is plenty to hit things like an RHM or a Waffle. However, hitting even another shark in the back is very difficult with the HE. In fact, I believe it's impossible even with calibrated, so it's not the most fantastic penetration. However, when you do penetrate it, you do have an average of 440 alpha per shot, which is definitely a sizable chunk when it comes to hitting the enemy. And of course, your shell velocity is sitting slightly lower than your AP rounds at just about 1000, which is still fairly decent when it comes to shell velocity for an HE shell. Now, as for the other characteristics of the gun, those are also fairly decent as well, because your reload time is sitting at about 9.3 seconds, which is definitely very nice and quick enough to kind of deter the enemy team from really trying to push on you too quickly, especially early on in the game. And as well, your base aim time and dispersion are also pretty decent, sitting at 2 seconds for your base aim time and 3.45 for your dispersion, leaving you with a decently accurate gun that will hit a lot of the time when you fully aim in, yet still prone to missing occasionally. Now your gun depression, like I said, is 10 degrees, and your gun elevation is 20 degrees, so you've really got a nice amount of play when it comes to aiming up and down with your gun. Now I would say that the turret traverse speed on this tank isn't the most fantastic, sitting at 20.86 degrees a second, and really I would say for me personally, this is the most annoying part about the tank. It's not so slow that you can't turn it around. However, it is just slow enough that sometimes a light or medium can flank around you just quick enough that you can't really aim at them quick enough. So really, if there is a weak point for this tank, it is probably going to be with the turret traverse. And then lastly, with the hull traverse, you're sitting at about 29.2 degrees a second. So the hull is definitely faster than the turret, and combined, they can be quick enough to sometimes get around. But again, it's not always a guarantee that you're not going to get flanked by a particularly fast light or medium tank. Now, it should be noted that all of these statistics that I just gave you are based on the assumption that you're not running any kind of equipment or provisions. So do note, if you do run those, you are going to have slightly better statistics than what I just gave you. And if you are curious what I am running, here are my provisions. You can see I've got both the types of cola so that I get a slightly better crew and as well a slightly better speed thanks to this added fuel provision. Now, when it comes to the equipment, here is what I have. However, I am potentially considering switching to gun rammer instead of calibrated shells. However, this is the loadout that I was using during all of these replays. So now that I've gone over the statistics, now let me go ahead and walk you through a replay that I have here. So as you can see, this replay is on Hellas and I'm moving towards the center of the map. Now, I've noticed that recently that coming here can sometimes result in a nicer game, which is why they have come here. Now, that particular shot was entirely my fault. The Caliban was not even looking at me, and I really should have aimed in a little bit better. However, this was right when the Caliban came out, so I wasn't too comfortable with it and wasn't quite sure. However, we are making up for it by taking up a nice hold down position in the middle of the base. Nothing too crazy, as you can see. In fact, we're even able to poke out a little bit for a second shot on the Tiger, but just enough that I'm able to get some shots off without really taking any damage. In fact, I still have every single one of my hit points. Now, I'm pulling back a little bit here because, as you can see, there is that M41D, and there we go, there is the slow turret traverse, but finally we do get a nice HE shell. So, as you can see, when we do penetrate the HE, it can do a nice amount of damage. It's more just about getting the penetration in the first place, which is, of course, due to the lower amount of penetration with it. Now, there's the Caliban again. Again, I goof up my shot. Thankfully, he doesn't penetrate his HE on my hatch, so I do thankfully get away with just a little bit of damage off of my hit point pool. We go for a shot in the Smasher, which is, of course, very helpful. Now, I do attempt to get a second shot in. However, I wasn't quite sure if I would hit it, so I decided to wait, and then I decided to go back and focus on everyone else. Now, at this point in the replay, or rather in the game, I go for a shot in the Caliban, and in a moment here, you're actually going to see me start to push forward. And the reason for this is that the Caliban is focused on my platoon mate Sturm 69, and the rest of the heavies are mostly focused on going towards the left. However, there is that tank destroyer who thankfully goofs up his shot, and then I then get the opportunity to then go and push on this Caliban with my platoon mate. Now, Sturm does get a nice shot in, or actually two nice shots into the Caliban, and I finish him off with the HE. I went ahead for the HE there, partly because it was already loaded, and also partly because I wanted to guarantee the clear because I did have a fairly decently aimed shell there. Now, there is the TD, and there we go. There is the accuracy working in my favor, and we get a very nice roof, or I guess you could say top shot off onto the tank destroyer there. Now, there is the Smasher left, and of course the OBJ-252U and the Tiger. Now, with the Tiger, I've already loaded up APCR because I know right where that weak spot is, and there we go, we end up clearing him. And even though that was a very hard shot to actually aim for, considering that the bush was kind of obscuring it, but now here we go, we're again in a hold down position against these two enemies. Now, we have an IS on our team, and of course there's me, and then of course there's also Sturm 69 in his T77. Now, you'll notice here that the moment that I go out of my hold down position a little bit, that Smasher does somehow magically manage to penetrate me somewhere. I have no idea where he did, but it doesn't really matter because we're going for a shot on the OBJ-252U there. Now, again, you can see we are in a hold down position against these two tanks. And right now we do have, again, that IS over there. Now there goes the OBJ across. I don't have a shot on him. However, Sturm 69, i.e. my platoon mate, does get a nice shot into the Smasher there. Now the IS is going to clear him. However, he's immediately going to get killed, unfortunately, by that OBJ-252U, leaving it to be just me and my clanmate in our platoon against this OBJ-252U. Now, at this point, it is very easily going to be a win. Both him and I do know what we're doing in this particular case, so we're going to go ahead and go under this canal here, and we're going to come up and surprise the OBJ-252U. Now, I already could probably take on this OBJ-252U in a 1v1 situation, so we do get a nice tracking shot there and a nice bounce, and then Sturm is going to go ahead and get a nice clear on him, thus giving us a win. And in fact, we actually both end up getting a class 1 from what I remember, which is one, really fun, and two, just a really good game to showcase what this tank is capable of, especially in a platoon, as you saw there, giving us a nice 3,500 damage, and of course the win. So there you go, that is the T54E2, i.e. the Shark, arguably one of my favorite tanks in the entire game, and definitely a very good deal, especially considering that it is currently out right now for about 7,500 gold for Black Friday. Highly recommend getting this tank because it is so good. However, it is, like I said, a hold down style tank, so if you aren't comfortable with that playstyle, even though this tank is super overpowered, it may still not be the best choice for you. However, it is still a very good tank nonetheless, and so with that, I hope you all enjoyed, and as always, have fun, good luck, and happy tanking.